I'm so excited to have Davarian Baldwin here. And it always feels a little weird to introduce in such a formal manner people that you admire, people whose work has informed your own. But I guess that's sort of the academic practice. So let me do that. Davarian Baldwin is a distinguished professor of American Studies at Trinity College. He is a leading urbanist, historian, and cultural critic. His work largely examines the landscape of global cities through the lens of the African diasporic experience. Baldwin's related interests include universities and urban development, the racial foundations of academic thought, intellectual and mass culture, Black radical thought, and transnational social movements, the politics of heritage tourism, and 20th and 21st century art, architecture, and urban design. The list of what he is not interested in would be shorter than what he is interested in. Professor Baldwin, who like myself is a Wisconsin native, what up, is here with us this evening and on UW these past couple of days to talk about his crucial and critically acclaimed recent book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower. But I gotta say that it pains me when I see introductions of Professor Baldwin gloss over his older work too. Professor Baldwin's first book, Chicago's New Negroes, Modernity, the Great Migration, and Black Urban Life, which was published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2007, was absolutely crucial for people like me who are interested in and who study the history of Black Chicago. That book landed the year before I started graduate school here. And between it and Adam Green's Selling the Race, which came out around the same time, that book completely transformed my own thinking about cultural production within, knowledge production within the sociopolitical landscape of Black Chicago in the early 20th century. And so before we move on to the subject of tonight's talk, I just want to make sure that we're giving that book and its author the flowers that are due. So thank you for that, Davarian. But my own intellectual indulgences aside, the occasion for Professor Baldwin's visit here in the current moment is to discuss his most recent book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities. In the Shadow has been widely praised for its deeply cogent and critical analysis of how universities, like UW-Madison, relate to the broader urban ecosystems of which they are a part. It's a book that the great scholar of history and African American studies, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, calls a, quote, devastating critique of our dated and quaint notions of universities and colleges as egalitarian sites of learning and cultural production. Baldwin, Taylor writes, quote, unmasks what Professor Baldwin calls universities as growth machines unleashing gentrification, stewarding large police forces, cheating tax coffers, while exploiting low-wage Black and brown labor throughout the campus. Professor Baldwin's research, writing, and commentary related to this work has been featured in numerous outlets, including NBC News, CNN, PBS, Sirius, the History Channel, NPR, BBC Radio, Time, Washington Post. I could go on and on. Recent pieces on the subject include Why We Should Abolish Campus Police, published in the Chronicle of Higher Ed in 2021. Higher Education as a Tax Problem and It's Hurting Local Communities, published in Time, also in 2021. Higher Education's Racial Reckoning Reaches Far Beyond Slavery, in the Washington Post. What Universities' Growing Power Means for Cities, also published in 2021. In addition to teaching and writing, Professor Baldwin sits on the executive council of the Society for Historians of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. He serves on the editorial boards for the Journal of Urban History, the Journal of African American History, and the American Studies Journal. Professor Baldwin is also co-editor of the Urban Life, Landscape, and Policy book series for Temple University Press, and was appointed a distinguished lecturer for the Organization of American Historians. We are so lucky to have him here this evening to talk about the idea, the vision of a social justice university, what that can look like, how we might achieve that. And please join me in welcoming Professor Davarian Baldwin.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay. Good to see you all on this rainy night. Thank you for coming out and sharing a little bit of time with me. Thank you, Simon, for that amazing introduction. I hope you honor me with your words and your heart, and I appreciate that, and your spirit. I just want to thank Adrian for stewarding myself and my son Ellison through this process. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Casey, the Center for Campus History in Siobhan, Stephen Young, Krista Olson, Nan Enstad, and everyone who's here today, named and unnamed, for being in this space, sitting with me in conversation about building a social justice university. You ready? Yep. Okay. So before we can get to the vision of a social justice university, we have to diagnose what university we actually live in today. Because isn't a university inherently social justice on its own? Isn't that what we're told? So before we can talk about the need for a social justice university, we must get to what are the conditions under which we live and the claims of the current university in its present iteration. So right before our eyes, colleges and universities have become the biggest employers, real estate holders, healthcare providers, and even policing agents in major cities and small, mid-sized college towns all across the country. With this kind of influence comes the possibility that universities make cities and towns more vibrant places to work, live, learn, and play. And from New York City's Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island to Mesa's recent Arizona State University satellite campus, everyone wants to build a campus. And to be sure, colleges and universities bring ideas and people together. We can't downplay that. And generate jobs and new, this is the word you're going to hear over and over and over again, new innovations. Say it with me, innovations. How many innovation parks do you have throughout Madison with the big W seal on it? Either here or in formation. Universities often involve these innovation projects to great aplomb. And this story also tracks in a college town like Madison, Wisconsin, the city by the lake. I first started coming to Madison, and I'm dating myself, in high school, as a high school kid in the late 1980s, when it looked like this on State Street. Sleepy town on the lake, 1990, 190,000 people in Madison, right? You came here to go to college or work for the state, or work for the government. A nice refuge from real cities, so to speak. Flash forward to 2024, the fastest growing city in the state of Wisconsin. 275,000 residents in that short time. Number one city in the country for young adults to live. Students, 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 and more students. More than can even be housed. Yes, but not just students. Because as a secondary city, as Chicago and Milwaukee become more expensive, too expensive. Secondary, this is not a diss. Secondary cities like Madison are relatively affordable places to live. Expensive for longtime residents, but not so much for those who would prefer or could live in Chicago or Milwaukee. Coming here to work for the city, work for the university, or work for the related professional opportunities in those innovation districts, at Epic, medical data collection, in pharmaceutical labs, in related parallel STEM organizations, in graphic design, in all of the industries that have supplanted heavy industrial production as it's moved further to the global south. Madison shifts from being a marginal player to central in the new economy anchored by higher education, knowledge, and production. So again, at the center of this story is the University of Wisconsin-Madison, named an Innovation and Economic Prosperity University just last year. As I just mentioned, the collaboration and cohabitation of entrepreneurship, technology, transfer, workforce development. And with that, to attract the best and brightest to come do work that is either directly or indirectly affiliated with the university, you need what? Housing. You need lifestyle. For those who have graduated from university but still want that university feel. Like this, right? High rises but kind of dormitory. Urban but pools on the ceilings. The Lux, the Hub, Domain. What else? Ovation. What you say? The James. Lucky. Right? Yes. All anthropomorphic, right? Action verbs, people, opportunities. Yes. Unaffordability. Upscale housing to meet the needs of this new demographic. Both students, upscale full-paying students from out of the country or out of the state, but also young professionals that flock to secondary cities like Madison. That for them seems relatively affordable. But this, of course, for long-term residents drastically increases the cost of living. Skyrocketing rental, retail, and transportation costs make a city that people no longer recognize. Longtime residents pushed to the periphery of development as far away as the airport. Homeless shelters overflowing. Not just a housing shortage, but affordable housing. So my YIMBY folks will be mad at me right now, right? Because the big data analysis is that, just build more. And because there's more supply, right, some of the housing will eventually, naturally, because of the market, reduce in cost. Wrong. What do we see? What does the evidence show? Even when we build more, developers would rather land bank housing and keep it vacant than reduce cost. Do you hear me? Is this thing on? Sorry, YIMBY bros. That ain't it. Just build more ain't the answer. The need is for regulated, affordable housing integrated into these new developments as a guarantee, not just as an inevitability of the market. I can't believe we're revisiting Reagan's trickle-down economics in 2024, but that's what we're talking about right now, right? So, because the point here is that even when we try to do affordable housing at reduced AMI, area median incomes, well, because the area is being flooded with high-income people, AMI is doing what? Raising. So this is the dynamic of a sleepy college town as now a magnet for what's become the central anchor of the economy, the knowledge economy. This ain't playland, this ain't Candyland, this ain't fiction, this ain't sci-fi. This is the present moment, right in our faces. And universities are at the center of facilitating capital and labor in ways that we had yet to imagine even 10 years ago. Yet it was on the horizon. Yet people living in Madison, living on Chicago's South Side, saw it coming 20 years ago. Saw it coming actually 40 years ago. So my point here is that this is a Madison story, but it's not just a Madison story. In these urban transformations, we have seen higher education's growing control over the economic development and political governance in urban America, or what I call the rise of universities. Higher education has become big business. In our cities, they're company towns. And there is a cost for those living in the shadows of these ivory towers. Campus expansions can raise housing costs and displace residents in the neighborhoods, largely of color, that's once surrounded the campus. South Campus. Talk about that in a minute. Higher education's broad control over labor as the biggest employers in whole states or whole counties or whole cities. If they are organized labor averse, a polite way of saying union busting, their low wages set the ceiling for entire communities as the biggest employer. Nonprofit university medical centers emphasize profitable boutique services, plastic surgery, high-profile cancer research, or prioritize student services to the detriment of the indigent care that they are required to offer in exchange for their particular tax exemptions. They just hide it because they get to self-report. You still with me? Campus police forces then surveil and profile the very same residents that come to work and service these campuses, now from farther away because they can't afford to live anywhere near campuses. So they're pushed out, largely black and brown, working class white, pushed out, come back to work on campuses, and are profiled and surveilled by the police that attempt to hoard the wealth that's being concentrated on these profitable campuses. This is the new socioeconomic landscape. Period. Even if schools don't hold, even if your school doesn't hold, I'm sure you're gonna say, well, that's not my school, Madison. Well, we do that, but we don't do that. Whew. We good, right? We fine. So let me just say that even if your school doesn't hold all of this power, if you are doing a line-by-line check edit, even if your school doesn't hold all of this power, we are witnessing more generally greater swaths of our cities being turned into a campus. So the question becomes, well, first of all, the historian hat I'm gonna put on for a minute, how do we get here? I'm not going to go all the way back. I'm going to do some recent history, what my historian friends might call journalism. But we're going to do a little bit of backtrack and say, how did we get here? So we're going to take you back at least to the 1990s, which is like, when I was hanging out here. Not ancient to me, but many of you, probably that's ancient history. You might have been in high school, not even born yet. Who knows, right? So here we go. This is the moment where knowledge became the new face of capitalism. Factories that made things, GM, Chrysler, Taylor Freezer, the list goes on, moving to the global south. Doesn't mean we didn't make things, or in fact, there were new industries that didn't replace it. So in this context, knowledge became the new face of capitalism. Where was knowledge being produced? In universities. The rise of the profit university. Just at the moment when schools were being tasked with becoming more entrepreneurial, as even state schools that had once received 70% of their annual budget from the state, that contribution gets reduced to between 12 and 20. I think I heard here it's 11. So public schools in name only. So universities are figuring out ways by the 90s to become more entrepreneurial at the very same moment that industry is moving to the global south and knowledge is moving to the center of our political economy. Universities are perfectly situated to serve as the economic engine for this new economic landscape. In 1980, we have the Bayh-Dole Act. Quiet as it's kept, before 1980, because 90% of research at universities is funded by federal dollars, it made sense to many people to say, well, wait, because it's federally funded, then whatever's produced should remain in the public domain. How novel. But in 1980, a group of high-powered university professors, presidents, and lobbyists got together and pushed forward this thing called the Bayh-Dole Act, which said that, yes, we know that 90% of our R&D is funded by federal taxpayer dollars, but we would still like to be able to convert that into intellectual property so that we can put it on the market and it can come back to the university in the form of royalties. And they said yes. Hence the rise of technology transfer units at universities all over the country, ways to capture university research and convert it into dollars to the benefit of the university. This becomes the new engine of the university's role in driving the knowledge economy. What is the knowledge economy? Here, research is used to create profitable commercial goods or patents in a range of fields, from pharmaceutical industries and software products to health services and, yes, military industrial weaponry. All that research and development is being done where? Where? Here. But then on top of that, secondary industries like construction, food services, Aramark, Tedesco, what do you have here? Cisco, the list goes on and on and on, right? Electrical, policing, private security, infotech, software design. All these other industries become profitable by feeding on the needs created by the knowledge economy to serve you all and me. Let's be clear, and me. So these laboratories become workshops. What I call elsewhere the new shop floor for America's economy. Well, if the South Side of Madison used to be dangerous, or South Side of Chicago, or South Central LA, or North St. Louis, or SWAT Atlanta, or South Florida, or West Baltimore, or West Philadelphia, or East Baltimore, where these universities are, were danger zones, How are you going to get STEM students and their families to come live in these dangerous communities? Right? The very same neighbors you said were dangerous, now you're saying are come work for us. Well, key to recruiting the best students, faculty, and their families to do this knowledge work is by creating an urbane cluster of laboratories, housing, retail, and nightlife. These variously called innovation districts, research parks, and knowledge communities, a word claimed by Wexford Development, who specializes in only university-driven real estate development. Why? Because university campus buildings are property tax exempt. It reduces their overhead costs. It is a profitable arrangement. Building out these knowledge communities, these live, work, play spaces. Have you heard that phrase before? Live, work, play spaces, so that in the midst of previously dangerous areas, you can have an insulated bubble playland to come work amidst the university experience, the campus lifestyle. Of course, these are neighborhoods that were once the communities or the homelands of communities of color that surrounded the campuses, where the land was relatively cheap and the political power most vulnerable. Hence the ways in which they steamrolled these communities to create Lux, Hub, Domain, Ovation, and the research corridors that surround them. Are you getting what I'm saying? Are we building, are we creating pictures in our minds about what I'm talking about in the Madison context? Yeah. So let's go to the Madison story a little bit. Areas cleared through urban renewal. Hospitals and campus buildings in 1960s and 70s began to head south. Greenbush neighborhood, black, brown, working class, white ethnic. What we today call what? South Campus. Originally cleared in the era of urban renewal through a thing that we call the 112 Credits Program. Another group of university lobbyists in the 50s and 60s that argued to put universities as the friendly face of urban renewal amidst the national movement to demolish and displace, to make way for bridges and tunnels and other things in the public good. Universities were surrounded by migrations of black and brown folks surrounding at the savages at the gates. Can we clear ground and replace those communities with university buildings or vacant lots for 20 and 30 years and land bank until we can find better uses? That is a national story. That is a Madison story. Or to the west part of campus, up Bascom Hill and further. In more affluent neighborhoods like Shorewood Hills, we sit the University Research Park to further concentrate wealth in already exclusive domains of privilege and power. Somebody hears what I'm saying, yes. Yeah. So more broadly, the campus has become a planning, the idea of campus, whether it be UW-Madison or Google or Amazon or the medical center, the idea of campus has become a planning mechanism to build out universities, large and small, by retrofitting neighborhood blocks to maximize wealth extraction based on land control, labor management, and even the privatization of governance. First through policing, but not only. You tracking with me? Again, land control, the campus as a mechanism for regulating land control, labor maintenance, management, and even the privatization of governance. Because of these dynamics, now both citizens and politicians are beginning to rethink what makes higher education actually good for the public? If this is the dynamic, what's good about this? The wealth doesn't trickle down. It doesn't disperse. It concentrates while we have our noses pressed to the glass of prosperity, just being happy to be in the presence of power. Thank you, Lord. But we can't afford any of it. We can't touch any of it. None of it benefits us or washes over us. We're privileged by association. So in most talks, I usually talk about, I ask the question, I test the question of what good is higher education for the public by looking at three areas: land, labor, and policing. Today I'm going to look at land and a little bit at labor. I've spent all day talking about policing. If you want to hear what I said, listen to the podcast, Center for Campus History, coming out soon, and we can have that conversation. But today I want to talk about land and a little bit about labor. Off the top, we presume that schools are an inherent public good, most clearly marked by their 501c3 property tax exempt status. The idea here is that because schools provide education, something that would normally have to be provided by the state, because schools are providing that, in exchange for that, we're going to make you nonprofit property tax exempt entities, both public and private entities. Now, obviously, public schools are nonprofits by nature of being a state actor. But even private schools, from Trinity to Hartford, property tax exempt. But it's this nonprofit designation in today's landscape, in the era of so this is a long-standing status that meant less 40, 50 years ago, but means everything in the midst of the knowledge economy, where those laboratories have become workshops. In this new context, it's this nonprofit designation is precisely what allows for an easier transfer of public dollars into higher education's private or self-interested developments with little public scrutiny. That it's precisely their status as an educational institution in the tax code that triggers their land as a financial tax shelter for themselves and their third-party investors. The construction companies all around here, the pharmaceutical and tech companies that seed their laboratories on this land, being on campuses becomes a financial tax shelter. It reduces overhead costs. This is a financial arrangement of great proportions that is happening right in our faces. These schools, especially state schools, pay virtually no taxes on their increasingly prominent urban footprint, yet they reap the benefits of things that are paid for with property taxes. The municipal services of snow clearance, trash removal, and public schools. Because let's not get it twisted. Even those elite professors, some of them send their kids to private schools, or they send them to the quasi-charter school that's a neighborhood school that only the professor kids go to. So they're benefiting from these public schools that their university contributes nothing to for their upkeep and maintenance and stability. I'm sure you can name some of those schools in the West Side. Perfect example of this, in 2016, the New Jersey neighborhood of Witherspoon-Jackson, historically black, not all black now, heavily gentrified now, but historically black neighborhood in northern New Jersey. They were realizing in 2014 and 15 that their property taxes, these are mostly homeowners, their property taxes were going up, yet there had been no infrastructural improvements. What? How did my taxes go up, but there's no improvements? They realized that because they were sitting next to Princeton University buildings that were not only not paying taxes, but were hosting the laboratories for the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly, that they were getting jacked. Right? That these arrangements I just laid out, private investors sitting on tax-exempt property land, benefiting the third-party investor, Eli Lilly, or the construction company, benefiting the university. So the Eli Lilly would donate a chunk of money that's small to them but big to the university. Would donate it in the name of educational purposes. So hence it became a what? A tax write-off. It comes to the university. The university puts it, a chunk of it, they pay for a PI and a slew of graduate researchers. And then another part of it goes to the amorphous category of overhead costs. And then the graduate students who, with a bachelor's degree or sometimes even a master's degree, if they were working directly for Eli Lilly, might start out making $60,000, make a discovery or research and get promoted to $100,000. But because they are graduate students, they are apprentices by law, which is still being contested right now, I know, might get a $25,000 stipend. Is that right? Maybe 20? If that. Produce the same discoveries if they had been directly employed by Eli Lilly and still get what? The same $20,000 stipend. So these arrangements of reduced overhead costs and tax-free land, suppressed wages on the part of graduate scientific workers, benefits the third-party investor Eli Lilly, benefits the university, but doesn't benefit the students, nor does it benefit the residents of the host community. Because those property taxes would have went to things like schools, snow removal, trash removal, the electrical grid, city services. So when the residents, because these are seniors, they did their research, they got time, they discovered these arrangements, they sued Princeton and won an $18 million lawsuit for tax compensation in 2016. And they were so disgusted by what they discovered that one resident dismissed Princeton as a hedge fund that conducts classes. But if you think this is just elite Ivy League, well-heeled universities, let's go to a state school, the Wild Wild West, Arizona State University. In the Wild Wild West, real estate is king. In the Wild Wild West, the biggest private development in the state of Arizona, a State Farm Insurance regional headquarters, is property tax exempt because it sits on ASU land in Tempe, Arizona. Yes. Yes. No allusion to educational purposes. This is the Wild Wild West. You can do whatever the hell you want. So ASU hosts a State Farm Insurance regional headquarters. It hosts a hockey stadium, semi-pro hockey stadium. It hosts retirement communities, well-heeled luxury retirement communities for those who want the university, coffee shops, and the museums and the lectures. They don't want the student noise. And they were able to shut down student noise just 2 years ago. And so how does this financial arrangement work? So these private developments sit on ASU land. They're property tax exempt. ASU's president, Michael Crow, the entrepreneurial president, that's his own title, his self-described. I sat with him for hours. So much hubris, he told me everything. Right? They charge these private developments a slightly lower fee than a property tax, which is beneficial to them. And then the university takes that money and is able to do things like build a new football stadium or pay Herm Edwards, who's been fired since then, but pay Herm Edwards, a former NFL football coach, NFL-style money without state legislature oversight. Because this is money around the bend. You tracking with me still? This is the new hustle. Or consider UC Berkeley. In 2021, Berkeley Capital Strategies, the real estate arm of the university, used a donation from a private developer to purchase the 112-year-old rent-controlled apartment building at 1921 Walnut Street. So the city of Berkeley had placed this building under rent control for 112 years. But because UC Berkeley is a state agent, all state agencies had the power to trump city protections. So once the building came under UC Berkeley hands, they could eliminate the rent control and turn it into luxury student housing on the right. I'm just trying to give you a flavor of how land control works under the rubric of nonprofit, of educational purposes. But also, we could talk about labor. Workers in the knowledge factories that we all are here in some way or another. We can talk about how 70% of all university instructors are basically glorified gig workers. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. The majority of workers on campuses are black, brown, women, and poor in the Ivory Tower low-wage world of construction, food service, maintenance, security, whereby in cities like Baltimore, they can work full-time for a university and still be eligible for public assistance because they are furloughed 3 months out of the year. And while many schools, many workers are engaging in collective bargaining, universities have adjusted and they begin to work with subcontractors. So even if you secure a contract with the bargaining unit, more and more workers are subcontracted where the contract doesn't apply. So these are the dynamics. These are the realities. It's not pretty. But there are other ways. I want to take you for a minute to the University of Winnipeg. Canada, it's always Canada, right? And Canada ain't perfect, but when I'm offering these observations, I have people that are probably dressed like me, arms crossed saying, oh, here he goes, academic critique. What are the solutions? Right? You love to critique, but you have no answers. Well, here's an answer. Demographic shift in the 2000s. About 6,000 students, a commuter school, the typical white students coming down to the university in the city to take classes and getting the hell out before nightfall. About 6,000 students. In the 2000s, the university student demographic rose from 6,000 students to 10,000 students in the matter of 5 to 7 years. Wow. But that demographic was very different. It wasn't the white full-paying students. It was the First Nations and what they call New Canadian students, we call immigrants, that lived around the campus. And to the benefit, they weren't benevolent in their decisions. This was a self-interested decision. University leaders said, well, we want to capture that wealth. We want to keep them here. And we understand that if we do college as usual, they won't be able to stay. Why? Because these new students are primarily adults, they are working class, and they have children and families. So in order to capture and to sustain this new demographic, we got to do college differently. What this meant was building out new student housing that did have dormitory style on top, but townhouses on the bottom. This meant that renegotiated contract with student government who controlled child care slots for the campus and doubling it from 120 to 240 slots for the new students. This meant building a housing structure like the downtown Commons with 4 different price points. Premium rate with the 13 balconies, that help underwrite market rate, affordable rate, and even the more affordable rent geared to income. Using the leverage of the university to push for exemptions from the affordable housing mandate. They said you cannot have high-end finishes in units for affordable housing. They don't deserve that. So using the leverage of a university with 10,000 students to say, we want an exemption to that restriction, and winning it. So if you are in a affordable rate or a market rate or a rate geared to income unit, you can't tell the difference. They're all exactly the same in terms of finishes, quality, square footage. And all of these units are made available to both students and residents. Yeah, you gotta live together. The common areas have free Wi-Fi if you can't afford individual Wi-Fi subscriptions in your unit. And the air duct system has been retrofitted to make way for indigenous smudging practices in the common areas. This is what's possible. They had a contract with Aramark, but the food was horrible, as we still know. $16 for a breaded chicken sandwich and French fries. Right? So they fired Aramark and created Diversity Foods, their own independent food service company. The beauty of Diversity Foods is that on the labor side, 60% of the workers come from what they call difficult to employ communities, formerly incarcerated, single mother, LGBTQ+, refugee, new Canadian. They are beginning to shift from wages to profit sharing. And on the production side, 70% of their raw materials come from small family farms within a 100-kilometer radius. I walk the kitchen. Each workstation has a compost bin next to it. And they send the cooking oil out to be converted into biodiesel to run the campus. This is not science fiction. This is right now. If you don't know anything about Winnipeg, it is brick cold about 10 months out of the year. Inside spaces are a high priority. They just recently built out the new recreational facility. You know, students would go apeshit if the rec center was made available to residents, to Madison residents. Well, they did that. They placed their new state-of-the-art rec center under a community charter so that residents, community groups have access to the rec center not at 7 in the morning or 12 at midnight, but negotiated, guaranteed hours in key periods of the day for community use under a community charter. This is not a perfect campus. If you want to talk about in the Q&A, I spoke to some faculty who said, but First Nations people on the north side are not even going to come downtown. So they began to build their own indigenous campus on the north side. So this is not perfect, but this is damn sure far better than what we see in the US in many places. These things are fully within our range of possibility. So with these things in mind, the usually for academics, the end of the story is the book, right? Write the book, ta-da, I'm done. For me, the book was just the beginning. The book was the provocation. From the book, I had all this data that never made it into the book. We know about these stories, right? You get about maybe 10% of what you research into the book. I didn't want this research to die, so I collated it, collected it, and said, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to have this as a clearinghouse for sharing with my colleagues? I thought that would be nice, you know? So I created this thing called the Smart Cities Research Lab, where we research and consult on best practices for building equitable urban communities with a particular focus on higher education-driven urban development. But thank God, my book was written for a general audience, and a brother had just gotten out of prison in Philadelphia and said, brother, you are telling my story. I grew up in the shadows of Drexel and UPenn. They destroyed Black Bottom to make way for University City. This is my story. Your research sharing is cute, but we need more. You need to hit these streets and serve as an advocate for these communities. Research ain't enough. And so the Smart Cities Lab went from an information sharing organization to a mercenary attack unit. And I'm not joking when I say that. Off the top, the research from the lab has assessed the town-gown landscape across the country, and it brings us to a series of logical conclusions. Collectively, we must all call for reparations from higher education's explicit role in slavery, indigenous land seizures, Jim Crow segregation, and urban renewal practices, including policing. But we also call for payments in lieu of the university tax exemption. We call on schools to reserve a portion of their tax-exempt endowments for community projects and a transfer of investment to community-serving financial institutions out of the money market account where most endowments sit. We call for university medical centers to honor their mandate of indigent care that provides their tax exemption. We call on schools to attach a community benefits agreement to any and all campus expansion projects that can include affordable housing mandates, zip code-specific jobs and job training, scholarships, access to open campus facilities and space. We insist on the build-out of community-based zoning and planning boards by cities with enforcement powers for all higher education-related expansions and developments. And we insist that all campus developments be governed by a community charter with Winnipeg in mind. We watch schools throw away food daily and demand that they package that food into healthy meals for communities of need. Finally, we call schools to divest in campus police and then invest in teams of preventive outreach and trauma care alongside investments in housing and food security programs that actually reduce harms for everyone. True community safety. You can clap. But you might ask, well, how have these ideas become practice? Take you to New Haven, Connecticut. New Haven Rising is a 40-year-old organization that has witnessed Yale run rampant over that working poor brown city in Connecticut. The biggest employer, the biggest landowner. Yale PD has total jurisdiction over the city of New Haven. Private security forces. And they had the power to police non-university affiliates, and because they are a private university, they are FOIA exempt. This is the new feudalism. So a coalition of local labor, unions, city, council persons, residents, and students asked me in my lab in the middle of the pandemic to join forces in their fight against Yale, a part of their Yale Pay Your Fair Share campaign. That university land control plus tax exemption equals a gutted city budget. We were able to make people see how the very prosperity of Yale was plundered from the host community of New Haven. While modest, after a couple of years of fighting, we were able to force Yale to the table to pay an additional $52 million over 6 years for property tax relief. This is a drop in the bucket of the additional $157 million they would owe if all of their properties were taxable, or the $40 billion endowment they hold, but we got them to the table when they did not have to be. Because every state in the land says, as a nonprofit, you owe your community Nathan, nothing, nada. But through public pressure, ground game, grassroots organizing, knowledge production, journalism, door knocking, rallying, partying, we got them to the table to pay. We're proud of that. And from that moment, communities across the country called on the lab, from Berkeley to South Florida to West Philadelphia to East Baltimore to New Haven again, recently to Durham, saying, how can we have 1, 2, 3 mini New Havens? For you post-Vietnam folk, you know what I'm getting at. Right? And that's the work that we're doing. For many, the answer has been pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, but pilots are not an answer unto themselves because Yale was paying a pilot for the last 20 years and the schools were still shitty. Because once the school pays the pilot, then they go on about business as usual. But pilots or some version of tax compensation is a start to have a bigger question about the ecosystem of university-controlled urban and rural communities. For you academics, for you scholars, for you historians that think archival work doesn't matter, let me tell you something different. We also built out this thing called the Renewal Project. It is at its early stages. This is a national collaboration tracing higher education's lead role in the urban renewal era demolition and displacement of black and brown communities and its present day legacy. So yeah, after 30 years of resistance, schools finally said, oh yeah, we can talk about slavery, right? University studying slavery, USS, because we can say, oh look, that was our past and look how far we've come. But hold on, in the 20th century, you've done some nefarious things, South Campus, that still hold true legacy. The very prosperity that is today is seated on the blood and ground of these eras of demolition and displacement. The Renewal Project. Present day, we have teams of faculty, community members, and staff and students in Denver, in Athens, Georgia, in Minnesota, in Newark, in New Haven, and recently in Madison. Thank you, Center for Campus History. Building out a four-pronged attack of research, curriculum development, public-facing projects, and hopefully, reparations campaigns. One of the major early wins of this is a mixed income housing overlay in Philadelphia. We discovered, if you look at this picture is from a lost victory during the creation of University City in Philadelphia, where students and faculty and residents sat in the administration building in '69 when they were demolishing the Black Bottom to make way for University City, and they won a guarantee that there would be scattered site housing throughout the targeted development area that would become University City. Those darker areas were supposed to be scattered site affordable housing. That never happened. So we recovered this document, and with the help of councilperson Jamie Gauthier, we use history to make the case for an mixed income housing overlay so that all new developments in the targeted area must include 20% of the units at affordable rates. It's not what we wanted because the AMI is too high. But again, this is what history can begin to do. Finally, there were a group of investigative journalists at ProPublica. You might have heard of that? Yeah. They discovered a gentleman who lived on the boundaries or on the outskirts of Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia, who had been displaced to make way for the campus. And they asked him, what the hell happened? Well, yeah, to make Christopher Newport News, Virginia, they demolished a middle-class black community called Shoe Lane as a part of the urban renewal projects. And the investigative journalists say, well, okay, well, wait a minute, is that just a Virginia story? Is that just a Newport News story? Or is this a national story? And somebody to the benefit of us said, you gotta talk to Davarian Baldwin and the Renewal Project. So from that moment on, we consulted on their investigative journalism. You can go on YouTube today and watch a 30-minute documentary called Uprooted that tells the story. Then councilperson Dolores McQuinn in Virginia watched Uprooted, read the stories that were in Essence and Chronicle and ProPublica, and said, shit, right? We need to organize a statewide commission, a legislative commission, to investigate this and begin to put together resources and a budget to offer those displaced families reparations. This is what research can do. This is what scholarship and service to social justice in a visionary, aspirational social justice university model can do. Ultimately, a discussion about the university and its neighborhoods must come to terms with how much higher education extends into people's lives already in ways that have nothing to do with tutoring programs, Thanksgiving food meal giveaways, community history projects, or even education. And therefore, it is my position that we must put a politics of abolition at the center of our discussion. The university has become the shop floor for all workers, the land baron over all residents, and the political boss of all city budgets. And so if the university is this all-encompassing, then an abolitionist vision must free the campus from its current conditions. Free the classrooms, free the cafeterias, free the laboratories and the residence halls from the private university and put them in service to a people's university. This is rooted in black studies. In 68, 69, 72, when black studies came online, the story has been bastardized in the present. They asked for black faculty and black curriculum, yes, but they also asked for the fight against the use of universities for urban renewal. They asked for residential housing on campuses. And in fact, Western University in Middletown, Connecticut had residential housing on its campus in the late 60s and early 70s. The vision that I'm holding today is not futuristic, it's not scientific, it's not sci-fi. It's rooted in the history of black studies. This is a black studies project. So therefore, we must free ourselves from the myth of the schoolhouse. Black folk knew this 40 years ago. Campuses have become the sites of much broader struggles over neighborhood displacement, living wages, IP rights, health care, wealth redistribution, police abolition. And we are just standing by watching as this history unfolds. But oh no, we are not, because we got to give it up to those powerful and fearless students everywhere from USC to Columbia who are beginning to put these institutions to task for the nefarious local and global callous machinations that are being put to the light. Let's clap it up for them. And let's join them. Let's join them as they face down and stare down NYPD right now as we speak. Because while we can look at the university as evil, as horrid, as neo-colonial, as settler colonial, the people surrounding the campuses, they want the cafeterias. They want the Wi-Fi. They want the art museums. It is time that the same halls that we sit in serve as the building blocks to set the foundation for a different path. On the west side of Chicago, when Lane Junior College became Malcolm X Community College, those black students did what? They added black curriculum and black teachers, but they also were one of the first schools to create a prison annex for incarcerated residents. They fired the off-duty Chicago PD and hired a black-owned, unarmed private security force. This ain't sci-fi. We've been here before. Listen, one of the primary claims of higher education is to serve the public and solve the world's greatest problems. Isn't that our calling card? So if we follow that claim to its logical conclusion, why wouldn't we start by addressing the university's hands in creating problems in our own backyards? A social justice university is not only imaginable, it is possible right now. Thank you.
So I guess I should admit I run an initiative called the University Alliance.
Oh, wow. Okay.
At UW-Madison, but it's not about what you're talking about. We're trying to make university accessible more to local governments all across the state.
Good.
Anyway, but it just like, damn, the name. You know.
Yeah, great minds.
Yeah, right. And I grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and I studied with Henry Louis Taylor. I don't know. If you know
that's my good friend.
Yeah.
And
so,
Keonga Yamada's father.
Yeah, exactly. And so we wrote about anchor institutions, and we talked about how anchor institutions can be used for good or bad, that kind of framework. And oftentimes people are kind of just politically unconscious when they adopt an anchor institution strategy. They say we're the biggest employer, da-da-da. So
we can do whatever the hell we want.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not they're not critically conscious, I guess. And I guess I've been hanging around in these spaces a little bit more, and I came across the University of Pittsburgh. I don't know if you're familiar with what they're trying to do. I think they're trying to leverage the anchor institution movement to make it, help leverage the economic power of the university to benefit community residents who are in historically underserved places. They've opened up community centers. And they've actually been trying to drive purchasing of the university to black
procurement contracts with local small businesses.
Exactly, local small businesses, but also particularly black-owned businesses.
Yes.
And they've really seen how difficult it is for these businesses to compete against these other businesses. So they're trying to help build their capacity. Anyway, I'm just saying, I hope you know about that kind of stuff, and I'm wondering if
I do. I've actually been called to come to Pittsburgh.
Good. Okay. Yeah.
So we had our urban history conference there, and we drew some attention to some of that work.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have these anchor institution strategies, for lack of a better term, like buy, build, hire initiatives.
Yeah, I've worked with Campus Compact.
Yeah, good. I just came back.
But the interesting thing about it is that, so I gave a talk there to their 100 top, universities, and I love Bobby Lauer, who runs Campus Compact. She's like, oh, this is great, but can you say it like this, and can you not be so hard, because these are dues-paying members, and we want them to feel good about themselves, and so it's a dance.
It is.
It's a struggle, because on one side we have these great things that the universities are doing, like Pittsburgh, but then they're not changing their economic footprint, their real estate practices. They're not changing their tech transfer practices, because we have universities that have multiple arms going at the same time. So my claim, my analysis is macro to say that until the politics and the frameworks of DEI and Campus Compact are actually impacting technology transfer and the CFO framework and the real estate divisions, then we're running parallel lives. And the very things you're trying to do are actually being undermined by the other arms of the universities.
Yeah.
Until the politics and frameworks that we're talking about govern the entire system, we are fighting against ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. And that's, again, critically if we're not critically conscious about it. And just a call to people in the audience, if you don't know, there is the West Campus expansion plan that's going to be happening. That if everybody in this room is concerned about what's going on here, in real time, like you said, not sci-fi, the university is intentionally planning on acquiring more land. And all this kind of stuff.
And they're building an innovation hub there.
Yeah, and if you're not aware of that and you want this gentleman to help, I highly encourage you all to kind of wake up and realize that this could very well happen to our community.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
They already hit on this.
Yeah.
On the West Campus Development Plan, it started literally as a revenue-generating real estate project, period. Exactly. And then began casting around looking for the intellectual rationale.
Right. To cover. Yeah.
And I would argue that most people in this room are probably not even
aware.
It's whatever.
Well, it's a school.
Yeah,
Right. But that's precisely the cover that the institutions and their third-party investors rely on.
Exactly.
But on top of that, they don't just rely on it as a cover. Like I said before, their educational status has become a lever for generating and extracting public dollars. That's the part we're not talking about. Let's say the quiet part out loud. It's precisely the status that allows them to shift and transfer revenues and influence to serve as what one scholar has called a parastate. To do the work and say, so then we're happy. We're happy that the university is doing this work because the state isn't. So that's something to think about. So thank you. Thank you for this conversation.
Into a conversation. So who's organizing in relationship to your efforts here on the Madison campus?
Well, we're building. I wouldn't say organizing, but we're building. Casey.
Hi, my name's
It's always
Casey
Casey.
Lucchini Butcher, and I'm the director of the Center for Campus History. We were formerly known as the UW-Madison Public History Project. We primarily research the university's past, but we are presentist. Insert spooky sound.
Ooh, where's Jim at?
Ooh. So we believe that the history of the university should be used to make change today on campus, and we have joined the Renewal Project. I wouldn't say that we are organizing, but we are trying to provide the research
Leverage
necessary to do this work because we need the research. The history proves that a lot of this has already happened here.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you for that. Yep. And I would say there are different skills and different paths. You can be a researcher in service to social movements. You can be an organizer. Some people call me an organizer. I say that organizer takes special gifts, special skills. I'm not an organizer. Some people I might say that I am in some capacity, but I respect organizers too much to call myself one, right? But I definitely know that my research and my advocacy is in service to social movements. So we have different paths for different people. We all can't be the same. We all can't be everything, and that's okay. We need multiple arsenals. For you Wu-Tang fans, we need multiple chambers, right, to do the work. Yeah.
Adrian made the mistake of handing me the mic, Davarian. But just thinking, and I know this is a little bit aside from the conversation about land specifically, but I'm just thinking about spatiality, I suppose, and our shared interest in racial capitalism.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about the University of Wisconsin-Madison as a predatory institution, not just locally, but also statewide.
Right.
I'm thinking specifically about the fact that, for the most part, when you enter into a classroom here, you are sitting in furniture that has been produced by incarcerated inmates in places like Waupun, et cetera,
Right.
because the university has exclusive contracts with the Department of Corrections here. Right, they have to, right? But so, and I guess that asshole who's saying more of a comment than a question. But if you want to
think about also the ag departments.
Yeah.
Working like Monsanto to extract heirloom seeds from indigenous communities and farming practices under the guise of educational information.
Right.
And shuttling those skills to private companies in GMOs and big ag. Like, we have multiple irons in the fire.
Right. What I'm thinking specifically about, the people the incarcerated people who are making university furniture are primarily being, incarcerated people who are being shuttled, black people especially, being shuttled from Milwaukee, being shuttled from Madison to Waupun, to Waupun, and then in turn, the university reaps the benefits of the incarceration of these people from communities that aren't even in Madison,
That's
right? So it's just this statewide predatory project, right? By which the university benefits.
And facilitates.
Yeah.
I mean, my biggest thing is that my book was driven by over 150 interviews. So in no way, we're driven by the uniqueness of we discovered something, the newness of it all. I make no such claims. My work is rooted in what people already knew, but as my colleagues in Congress say, giving it a language and a framework, a way to talk about it in ways that people might not have had the language to talk about it. But there's no newness here. It's driven by people's deep knowledge about the relationships between universities and communities.
Yeah, you touched upon this briefly, but I think it's something that needs to be looked at in much greater depth, and that's the question of to what extent should universities be in the business of law enforcement. And I think that here in the Madison area, that's a particularly serious problem. I mean, essentially, you have a police force that has power of arrest over any citizen in Dane County, but is accountable only to the chancellor of the university, and they maintain a high profile, not only on campus, but even off campus. And I just find that there's a serious imbalance in that respect. Thanks.
I appreciate that. And people have said to me, and this is a good conversation, that, like Johns Hopkins or Yale PD as private universities are only answerable to the president and the board of trustees, the board of regents. At least at public universities, the university police are answerable to the state legislature. But in the day-to-day of making decisions about who is criminal, who is not, what are the boundaries of the campus? We know statistics that came out in 2023 that, of the number of non-university affiliates that were arrested by UWPD, 40% of them were black. While we know that 7%, only the black population of Madison is only 7%. So this is about governance in the day-to-day. And the front line of governance is police. And as wealth is concentrated and hoarded on the new West Campus and on the South Side, it's the police force's role, their duty, to concentrate and protect that wealth, to maintain the playland lifestyles for the students coming from all over the country and world to come here and to jaywalk and to vape and to do whatever they do on campuses, and which is fine, I have no hate against that, but treat them the same as you treat the kids from Madison, right? If a campus is gonna be a site of criminal amnesty for full-paying students, let it be a site of criminal amnesty for everybody. Don't just turn it into an exemption playland for the full-paying students, for those who have membership. But this is what it's become. So this is why when Johns Hopkins was putting forward the plans for building out its private police department, Senator Mary Washington said, this is like building a Vatican City in the middle of Baltimore, a semi-independent republic. The same thing could be applied to UWPD. So thank you for that comment.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't resist a question about the specific case of Tulane University in New Orleans, which is in fact very proud of the fact that it's the largest employer, but also the complicated role it plays in the history of the city, and then the specific presence of a think tank called the Education Research Alliance of New Orleans that is also the engine and the think tank of the charter school conversion for the entire city. So I'm kind of curious if you have any insight into that unique
I don't
case.
have particular insight into New Orleans or Tulane, but University of Chicago was the lab schools was a forerunner in the charter school movement. There are a number, Marquette University with Howard Fuller, a forerunner in the charter school movement in Wisconsin. Going from being a transnational black radical. And I understand in some ways, like, public schools that fail black children, we need to invest in something like charter school. I get the logic, but I'm horrified by seeing the rollout and the end results of charter schools that we don't turn the ship. When looking at New Orleans, public schools being taken over by charter school, by the privatization of education. This is a problem in the degree to which education schools provide professional, academic legitimacy and cover to this basic jack move on public education. This is a problem. And we can look at also cop shops. We can look at ShotSpotter and the various cop labs that come out of universities, alongside the transfer technology units that, as I'm moving into LA right now, they're saying, well, yeah, we go to the universities to study the problems. I'm like, well, what about going to university because they cause the problems? So this is the new frontier. Yes, thank you.
My own research in a country far, far away, Turkey.
Right.
3 of the last 5 presidents of our technical university, their biggest achievement they were proud of were how many square meters of technopark they built.
Yep.
For it raised the revenues they needed to renovate the campus because the state doesn't provide that funding.
Right.
So similar story in Arizona, in Madison,
Yes.
in Istanbul.
Right.
States are cutting back funding,
That's
or
right.
they don't have the means, and universities are finding themselves in a situation to raise private funding, which comes with all the baggages you mentioned if
Yes.
they're not being if they're not in Canada.
Yeah.
Which has to do with the politics of higher ed.
Yeah, and neoliberalization.
And neoliberalization and lack of electoral awareness
Yes.
of such issues. And in Wisconsin, we had a panel in this next room last week about the politics of higher ed here. So given your activist work, research-driven activist work, there's also that side of the equation that needs to be addressed, like, increasing public support.
Of course.
For more public funding.
Yes, and that's at
How
the
do you see
foundation.
that intersection?
Yeah, so at the foundation of the work that I'm saying is that so I guess maybe it's more of a presumption than a statement, but that's, yes, we need to increase public funding. But the point that I want to add to the conversation is that while we understand and sometimes rationalize that, yeah, schools have to be more entrepreneurial because they're not getting public money, they have to become more entrepreneurial. Understood. But the point that I'm making is that in their so-called entrepreneurial privatization, they're actually doing it through public money, right? A lot of the privatization is coming from public coffers. So let's be real about this. That's the piece that we aren't talking about. And that's my contribution, right? But yes, at the foundation, we need to return to publicly funded higher education. No question, without question. But even in the rationale of privatization, we still turn to public money. And if we turn to public money, that's where we come in. We got to have a say, right? Both public and private schools only exist because of the state charter, including Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Michigan, Wisconsin. We got to start talking about revoking the state charter. If schools, both public and private, have come into existence because of a state charter, that means their primary role is to serve the public good of that state. Yet schools are becoming more and more exclusive, fewer in-state students, more police, more third-party construction and housing developers. How is this serving the public good? How is this meeting the needs of the original public charter, state charters? We should be asking these questions.
We have time for one more question, and it's this.
Hi. I was curious about, so it sounds like some of this work you're doing during COVID, and curious what opportunities the closing of universities produced or might have foreclosed.
Yeah.
And your thoughts of what that timing, what that moment might have created.
Yeah. On the negative side, COVID opened the door for the increase in remote learning as an industry. Non-human data science, technological advancements and surveillance, all those things. But it also opened the door to questions. For example, at Columbia, the undergraduate DSA said, why are we paying the same price for school, remote or in person? And they withheld their tuition, not just for their own personal interests, but they said, not just until you start equalizing the pay, but also not until you start doing right by the Harlem residents who you steamroll to make way for the Manhattanville campus. And then the graduate students, at the height of COVID, and we saw a graduate student strike wave across the country, because schools like Columbia, they pay such paltry wages that when graduate students go out to get housing in the city of New York, third-party real estate owners and landlords will not rent to students because they don't have enough money. So this pushes students back to Columbia or NYU or UChicago housing, where they're supposed to be in the business of serving higher education, but they continue to increase the rents, saying that we have to keep up with the market. This is university-owned housing. So graduate students went on strike. We saw during COVID in Philadelphia that when students return, because we know we can make more money when students are on campus, paraphernalia, housing, food, nightlife. There was no color-coded alerts about bringing in people with disparate health practices back to a living, thriving West Philadelphia, right? Leaving a black and brown community vulnerable to the return of students from all over the country and world without any kind of COVID protocols. It called for demand for higher education to be available and subject to the very public health claims that it sends around the world and sells in packages. So these are just some of the ways in which COVID both foreclosed and opened possibilities that we still are trying to build on. So thank you for your question.